When you're in negotiation, you have to understand, one, who has the most leverage, and secondly, who wants it more, because that will dictate how strong a position you could take. Hello again. Welcome to The Ruthless Truth. I am your host, Truth Davis. In this forum, we'll discuss a wide range of topics, opinions, truths, based on what I believe to have been a unique life experience. And you can read more about that in the bio or in the notes. While there's a wide range of topics, I generally stay away from sports and politics, primarily because you can get that anywhere. General format, I'll share some early thoughts, observations on current trends in the country or news items. Then the majority of the time we'll be going deeper on a subject, which is, today's truth. And then I like to end with a fun American history fact. You can engage with The Ruthless Truth on social media at TruthDavis5. Please follow at Instagram, TruthDavis5. There's also the website, truthdavis.com. And then there is The Ruthless Truth Facebook and Ruthless Truth YouTube. Okay, so we've just recently completed the first half of 2025. And so how are people feeling? How's your mood today? Well, according to the most recent consumer tracking data that tracks American sentiment, we're not feeling that great. And it's a little understandable. There's a lot going on. The state of the U.S. economy right now is pretty overwhelming. We've got the constant discussion back and forth about tariffs. There's a significant housing crisis driven by low inventory, which is kind of tied to high mortgage rates. That is also tied to the constant pressure from the White House and other segments to have the Fed lower interest rates. And of course, there's a recent passage of the economic and tax legislation, which we're all trying to figure out how it's going to impact us. And then finally, the flooding tragedy in Texas, which caused so much devastation and scores of lives lost. It's almost too difficult to comprehend. But despite all of this, at the halfway mark of 2025, the stock market has been surprisingly resilient, with most of the major exchanges near all-time highs. And we have not yet seen the tariff activity impact inflation. I say not yet. And if you're like me, it may be a little challenging to keep everything in balance. As I've stated before, I find it almost wasted energy to worry about things that I can't control. And there are a lot of these things that we see every day that we don't have any control over. So who knows what's in store for the second half of 2025? But I personally have two hopes and prayers for the second half of the year. First, that the second half will have less volatility when it comes to economic, tariff, and immigration activity and policy. And second, it would be wonderful if we could start to see some return to civility in this country. Disagreement doesn't have to mean hatred. I have friends at every point across the political spectrum, from hardcore conservatives to bleeding heart liberals. And we debate topics all the time. But we're still friends because we still have mutual respect for each other. Okay? Mutual respect. So let's all try to practice a little more respect and civility and effort to see the other person's point of view. Okay, let's get to today's truth. I had a friend say to me, I can't believe you've been doing this. This is your 10th episode and you still haven't told your Steve Jobs story. And I said, while it's an interesting story, I think of the Ruthless Truth as a teaching platform. And I don't know what lesson I'm really going to, convey from that experience. And he's like, well, just find one because it's a great story. I said, okay. So today's truth is I'm going to tell you the story of the pivotal meeting I had with Steve Jobs and how that impacted the course of development for the iPhone. Okay. So years 2003, pivotal time in the wireless category because technology advances are getting so that there's more bandwidth and wireless can do more than just carry voice calls. We had recently launched text messaging and camera phones, and the next frontier was combining music onto your mobile device. And so that's where we were. So it's Monday night, about 7 o'clock. I'm driving home from work. My phone rings, and it's my boss, who's the chief marketing officer for Verizon Wireless. And about 7 o'clock. And then he says, hey, I need you to get out to Cupertino Friday afternoon. I just got off the phone with Steve Jobs. I scheduled a meeting for 1 o'clock for you to take him through our mobile music strategy, our go-to-market plans, and take him through the advertising campaign, co-branded advertising campaign that we would use to launch the product. And I was a little confused by this because I said, I haven't been working on that. He said, oh, I know you haven't, but I told Steve you had. And so, he's waiting for you to come in and take him through how we would do this. I'm like, geez, 4 days? I said, could you at least schedule the meeting for Monday? And that way the team and I could work all over the weekend. He's like, no. I made it sound like you've been working on it for months and you just couldn't get out to California until Friday afternoon. It's like, wow. He said, okay. So that's what's in hand. We'll check in and go through more details tomorrow, but I just wanted to get you started thinking on it because, you basically got 3 days. So the call ends and I'm sitting there going, wow, okay. I could take it as like, wow, that's really an unrealistic, oppressive request. Or I could positively look at it and saying, he must have a lot of confidence in me and the team to be able to do this in 3 days. So I chose to take it that way. So I immediately called my agency account super and I said, look, I explained to him the phone call I just had. I said, so clear the deck for the rest of the week. I'll be in at 8 o'clock tomorrow morning. At that time, I was living in Basking Ridge, New Jersey, which is about 30 minutes outside of Manhattan. Agency was based in Manhattan. I said, I'll be there at 8 o'clock in the morning, bring the whole team in, and we had to we just have to get going. So we started Tuesday morning, and there was really 3 things we had to put together. We had to first put together a pitch, almost an orientation on Verizon Wireless, because we knew Apple was also looking for a wireless carrier for, their mobile music project. And we felt that he probably didn't understand how much more dominant and how much better a partner we would be than our rival AT&T Wireless. Second, had to lay out kind of the strategy of how we would go to market. And then third, the biggest part was to really present an actual advertising campaign, a co-branded advertising campaign of how Apple and Verizon Wireless would go to market together. So that was the assignment. And we started. And so about midday Wednesday, my boss comes in. He checks in just to see where we were on progress. We took him where things were going. And he's like, okay, that's coming together pretty good. Like where we are. I'll be back tomorrow and we'll go through the final draft. So we had about another 30 hours. And so that Thursday night, he comes in. We take him through the whole presentation, the whole pitch. And my boss was a tough guy. He didn't really give out accolades. A good compliment from him was, that doesn't suck. And so when we finished, he was very pleased. He was like, this is a really good pitch. It's really good stuff. Really proud of you guys. He said, now, let me just tell you, Steve doesn't want to do this. All right. I'm just telling you right now, he doesn't want to do it. And I give you a 25% chance of success in convincing him to do this. So just don't want you to get disappointed if it doesn't go well because he doesn't want to do it. I'm like, okay, well, way to send us in the battle all charged up. So we catch a flight Friday morning early, get out to San Francisco around 11. We get a hotel room for 65, 90 minutes just to kind of go through it. And the team was me, my account super Tom, and my creative director George. It was just the 3 of us. We go in, the meeting starts at 1. At 1 o'clock, everybody's assembled. The Apple team's on one side, Me and my two guys are on the other side, and we're just waiting for Steve to come in. He comes in a couple minutes later, comes in, sits down, chair right across from me. No introductions, no, how you guys doing? No, how was your flight? None of that. Comes in this Steve Jobs uniform, jeans, white t-shirt, tennis shoes, sits down and looks right at me, and he says, so you want me to work with you to develop this mobile music category. And then you want my engineers to work with your technicians to design and develop the actual hardware and the phones to be able to do these things. And then you want me to work with you on a co-branded advertising campaign to go to market and launch this mobile music category. I don't want to do any of those things. But Mike said you were going to come in here and dazzle me today, so let's see it. That's how the meeting started. And I said, well, okay, let's get going. So first started telling him about the strength of Verizon Wireless and letting him know, first of all, not only were we the number one wireless carrier, but we were a top 10 retailer because we had over 1,600, retail stores. Also let him know how we were dominating in growth over the last few quarters. We had added more net users than our next three competitors combined, just kind of show our dominance. And then the next thing was to talk about, now let's talk about how, before we take you through the advertising concepts, we put together kind of a mood reel, just to kind of give a tone or feel, some imagery about what this could look like before we get into the specific stuff. So I turned it over to my account guy, and he keys up the reel. It's about 2 minutes when we play it. And then after the reel was over, Steve Jobs turns to his vice president of advertising and pushes him a little bit on the shoulder and says, why doesn't our agency come up with stuff like this? I'm like, okay, I think we're cooking. I think we're doing pretty good here. So after we went through that, George, the creative director, took him through the advertising concepts, and which were really good. It's kind of hard for me to describe them in an audio standpoint, but we did a really good job of combining the iconic elements of the iPod and the white headphones, and with Verizon Wireless and our test man for, 2 or 3 advertising ideas. So that was pretty much our pitch. We really didn't get a lot of questions till we got to the end. And so then I just looked at him and I said, how was that? And he just kind of nodded and he said, that was pretty good. And I said, no. Are you dazzled? And he just kind of laughed and he says, okay, I tell you what, we can do this. So he gets out, he got his pen and paper, he's starting to sketch out. He said, we can do this. He starts going through next steps. But then he says, but there's one part of the deal that I've got to address. I'm like, okay. He said, you want a 2-year exclusivity. I said, yes. He's like, I want 5 years. And I said, well, how important is the 5 years to you? And he said, it's a deal breaker. I got to have 5 years exclusivity. I'm like, why? Why do you need 5 years? He said, because here's what I believe. I believe if I do a 2-year deal with you, at the end of the 2 years, you're going to take the whole thing to Microsoft. And I'm thinking, wow, I guess that's why he's Steve Jobs, because that was exactly our plan. That was exactly our plan. And so I had to say, well, look, I don't have the authority to authorize that. You'll have to talk to Mike over the weekend. I said, is there any other barriers? Anything else to stop us from going? He said, nope. If I get my 5-year deal, we can do this. I'm like, great. So meeting ends great. We're feeling good. We're getting the car headed back to the airport. I called my boss to let him know how it went. And he said, how'd it go? I said, he's in. He's like, what? I said, he's in. He said, you closed him. I said, yes. He's in. He's ready to go. There's only one deal point that's a sticking point. And I told him, you two could talk about it over the weekend. And he's like, well, what is that? I said, he wants a 5-year exclusivity deal. He wants 5 years of exclusivity. And my boss was lost. There ain't no effing way I'm going to give him 5 years of exclusivity. I wouldn't give 5 years to anybody. He said, how big of a deal was it? I said, he said it was a deal breaker. He said, if he doesn't get it, we can't work together. He said, well, I'll talk to him about it, but there's no way we're going to give him 5 years. I said, okay. So we get to the airport. I got to catch my flight to Atlanta. Long day. Started the day in New Jersey, flew out to San Francisco, had the meeting, headed back to Atlanta. Enjoyed my weekend. Come back in Monday morning to my boss's office, and I said, so, you talked to Steve over the weekend? He said, yeah, we talked last night. I said, okay. And he said, you were right. He's really stuck on the 5 years. I said, okay. So what'd you say? I said to him what I said to you. There's no effing way I'm going to give him a 5-year exclusivity. I was like, so what did he say? Well, it really was a deal breaker. So we just kind of walked away. I'm like, so it's over. We're not doing it. He said, look, he knows my number. If he changes his mind, he can always call me, but we're not going to do 5 years. I was like, okay. Well, here's what happened. Steve Jobs never called us back. And instead, he worked with AT&T. He would have preferred to do it on Verizon because he really believed in a quality experience and everyone knew we had a higher quality network. But he was very clear on what he wanted. So when he couldn't get it from us, he actually worked with AT&T to develop it. And the AT&T was so excited. They gave Apple total liberty to develop iPhone's hardware and software in-house. And that was a rare practice at the time. You didn't do that with your partners. And then they paid Apple only a fraction of the monthly service revenue in exchange for the exclusivity deal, because AT&T Wireless also wanted an exclusivity deal. Now, if you read about it on Wikipedia or somewhere, it'll say it's a 4-year deal. I don't know why it's reported that way, but it was definitely a 5-year deal. So because of that, when the iPhone finally launched a few years later, the only place you could get it was AT&T Wireless for 5 years. Verizon was shut out for 5 years. And during that 5 years, we often had to answer questions of, did we regret the hard stance that we took with Apple? And of course, we said no. But here's the lesson to learn from that. When you're in negotiation, you have to understand, one, who has the most leverage, and secondly, who wants it more, because that will dictate how strong a position you could take. And where we possibly overplayed our hand is Verizon Wireless always considered themselves the biggest player at the table. Whether we were talking to Apple, talking to Microsoft, no matter who we talked to, we always felt like we were the big guy at the table and we would, impress our will onto others. And what we learned over the next 5 years, once the iPhone launched and exploded, there was no question that they were bigger than us. And will I say it humbled us? No, because we were incapable of being humbled. But that meeting changed the course from a Verizon Wireless, Apple partnership to basically pushing them to AT&T Wireless, and the rest, as they say, is history. To today's American history fun fact. I'm going to tell the story of the first black child millionaire in the United States. Now, if you poll people and ask them who was the first black millionaire in the United States, most people will say Madam C.J. Walker, who had a very successful hair care business that was launched in the early 1900s. But around that same time, there was another story, and I'm going to tell you the story of Sarah Rector. Sarah was born in 1902 in the all-black town of Taft, Oklahoma, which was in Indian Territory. Her parents were black grandchildren of Creek Indians born before the Civil War. And because of that, as part of the Treaty of 1866, which was an agreement between the U.S. federal government and the 5 civilized tribe nations, descendants were entitled to land allotments. So in 1910, at the age of 9, Sarah inherited 160 acres of land. Although the land was rocky, unproductive, and viewed unsuitable for farming, The better land was usually reserved for white settlers. Still, the land did come with property tax expense of about $30 a year, which would be equal to about $1,000 today. So to help raise money for the tax bill, in February 1911, Sarah's father, Joseph Rector, leased the land to the Standard Oil Company. Then in 1913, a couple of years after that leasing agreement, oil was struck on the land, and the daily yield of 2,500 barrels generated daily income of $300, which is equivalent to about 10,000 in today's dollars. Now, at that time, the law required that descendants and citizens of Indian Territory who possess significant land or money be assigned a, quote, well-respected white guardian. In 1913, Sarah received royalties from Standard Oil of $11,500, which is equivalent to $368,000 in today's terms. Well, it didn't take long for news of Sarah's wealth to spread, not only nationwide, but worldwide. She was getting requests for donations, requests for loans. She was receiving marriage proposals. And the Oklahoma State Legislature attempted to get her declared as honorary white, which would allow her the benefits of elevated social standing, such as being able to travel first class in the trains or on the train. Well, Sarah's situation caught the attention of Booker T. Washington and W.E.B. Du Bois. They were particularly concerned about the management of her financial affairs by her white guardian. So a memo from the NAACP to the Bureau of Indian Affairs included this statement: is it not possible to have her cared for in a decent manner and by people of her own race, instead of by a member of a race which would deny her and her kind the treatment accorded a good yard dog? This prompted Du Bois to establish the Children's Department of the NAACP, which investigated claims of white guardians who were suspected of depriving black children of their land and wealth. As for Sarah, she was a millionaire by the age of 20. She attended school, she got married in the early 1920s, had 3 children, and lived, by all accounts, a lavish lifestyle throughout the 1920s. At the height of her wealth, she owned Rector Mansion, which was a large stone home in Kansas City that took up an entire block. Some of her more famous guests at the Rector home included Duke Ellington, Joe Louis, and Count Basie. And although she lost most of her fortune during the Great Depression, she still had land holdings in Oklahoma and Missouri. Sarah remarried in the 1930s and led a comfortable life until her death from a stroke in 1967. Sarah Rector can be viewed as another example of neglect for Native sovereignty and cultural legacy due to the enforcement of systemized racism and sexism against non-white and non-male parties allotted land and thus wealth and power through the imposition of white male guardianship over non-white women such as Rector. Also, her story will be told in a soon-to-be-released documentary entitled Sarah's Oil. So, that's all I have for you today on The Ruthless Truth. Again, you can engage on Instagram at TruthDavis5. Please engage and follow. There's also TruthDavis.com. And then there's Ruthless Truth YouTube channel and Facebook. So, thanks again for listening, and I will talk to you next time.